Introduction: The myth of public success. There is a myth we tell ourselves, quietly, almost without noticing. It goes like this: greatness is made in the light. That the people we admire, the leaders, the builders, the disciplined, became who they are in front of us. On the stage, in the speech, in the victory. We see the general on his horse. We see the emperor on his throne. We see the finished statue, the marble jaw, the calm eyes gazing at something eternal. We do not see the hours before. We do not see the tent. Somewhere in the frozen borderlands of the Roman Empire, along a river called the Danube, in the 9th year of a war that would not end, a man sat alone by candlelight and wrote a sentence meant for no one but himself. He did not know it would survive 2,000 years. He did not know we would read it. He was not writing for us. He was not writing for anyone. That right there is the whole story. Not the war. Not the empire. The sentence written for no one. Because here is what almost no one tells you about self-mastery. It is not built in the moments you are watched. It is built in the moments you are not. The gym no one attends. The page no one reads. The temptation refused where refusal earns no credit, because no one will ever know you were tempted at all. This is a story about a Roman emperor. But it is really a story about the dark, the private, unglamorous, undocumented hours where character is actually assembled, piece by piece, like a structure raised in the night so that by morning it simply is, and no one asks how it got there. We call this building in the dark. Let's step into the tent. Chapter 1. The Emperor's Tent at Midnight. Picture it. Not Rome, not the Forum, not the marble, not the crowds. Picture the frontier. The year is somewhere around 170 AD, maybe a little later. The Marcomanni and the Quadi-Germanic tribes pressing against the empire's northern edge have drawn Rome into a war that will drag on brutally for most of a decade. This is not a campaign of glory. It is attrition. Plague is moving through the legions, the same plague, some historians believe, that has already killed hundreds of thousands across the empire. Winters are long. Supply lines are thin. And at the center of this grinding, joyless war sits a man who never wanted to be a soldier at all. Marcus Aurelius was, by every account we have, a reluctant emperor. He preferred philosophy to conquest, contemplation to command. And yet here he is in his 50s, his body worn down by illness, commanding legions in a war without a clean end in sight, because duty put him there and duty would not let him leave. By day, he is watched constantly. An emperor at war is never alone in the way an ordinary man is alone. Guards outside his tent. Officers awaiting orders. Messengers arriving with news of skirmishes, of losses, of the endless logistics of feeding an army in hostile territory. Every gesture he makes in daylight is observed, interpreted, repeated. Power, especially in the ancient world, is a performance with no intermission. But at night, something else happens. When the lamps in the camp burn low and the officers have finally stopped needing him, Marcus takes out a set of private notebooks. Historians believe he wrote much of what we now call meditations during exactly this period. In camp, during the Marcomannic Wars, in the fragments of time between command and sleep. The original title wasn't Meditations at all. It's believed to have simply been called Taius Huten, to himself. Not to Rome. Not to history. To himself. Try to sit with that for a moment. The most powerful man in the known world, a man who could have commissioned any scribe, any monument, any grand public philosophy, chooses instead to write privately, awkwardly, in Greek rather than his native Latin, in a form that reads less like polished prose and more like a man talking himself down from his own worst instincts. Read a few lines and you don't hear an emperor. You hear someone arguing with himself. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That is not the sentence of a man who has already mastered himself. That is the sentence of a man reminding himself, again, because he keeps forgetting. Because self-mastery is not a switch you flip once. It is a conversation you have with yourself every single night, for as long as you're alive. There is something almost unbearably human about this. We tend to imagine Stoic wisdom arriving fully formed, chiseled like the marble busts of Marcus that survive in museums today, serene, untroubled, finished. But the notebooks tell a different story. He writes to himself about anger, and you sense he has been angry that day. He writes to himself about the pettiness of fame, and you sense someone somewhere has just praised him in a way that made him uneasy. He writes about mortality with the specific urgency of a man who has just watched people die of plague around him. This was not philosophy performed. This was philosophy practiced, in the one place performance couldn't reach. And that's chapter 1's quiet central image, a man ruling the known world by day, and ruling nothing but his own mind by night, believing the second job was the harder one. Chapter 2, the philosophy of duty without an audience. Here's a question worth sitting with. What would you do differently today if you knew, with total certainty, that no one would ever find out? Not if no one was watching in the abstract sense. We all say we'd do the right thing regardless. But truly, specifically, the workout you'd skip. The message you'd send. The corner you'd cut on the project no one will inspect closely. The kindness you'd withhold because it costs you something and buys you nothing in return, not even gratitude, because the person will never know you almost didn't help. Marcus Aurelius built an entire ethical framework around exactly this question, and it wasn't original to him. It came from a philosophical tradition stretching back to Zeno of Citium, refined through Chrysippus, carried forward by Epictetus, the former slave whose teachings Marcus studied closely and quoted often. But Marcus is the figure history remembers for actually living it, at the summit of worldly power, where the temptation to perform virtue rather than practice it would have been strongest. Because think about the position he was in. As emperor, virtually anything he did could be recorded, praised, immortalized. He had every incentive structure available to a human being pointing him toward performance, toward doing good loudly, so it would be remembered. And yet the actual writing we have from him is obsessively concerned with the opposite. Doing good quietly, doing good even when it would never be recorded, doing good specifically stripped of the reward of being seen doing it. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Notice the structure of that sentence. Not be seen as one. Not convince others you are one. Simply, be one. The doing is the whole transaction. There is no second step where the universe notices and applauds. This is the Stoic concept of duty for its own sake, what philosophers sometimes call the intrinsic value of virtuous action, separate entirely from consequence or recognition. It's a demanding idea, because it removes the scaffolding most of us secretly rely on. We tell ourselves we're disciplined, but so much of our discipline is socially witnessed. The gym check-in, the public goal, the promise made to someone else who will ask about it later. Take away the witness, and watch how much of the discipline evaporates. Marcus is asking for something harder, virtue that survives total privacy. Duty performed in a tent, at midnight, in a war most of Rome would rather forget, written in a language most of his own soldiers couldn't read, in a notebook he almost certainly never intended anyone else to open. If you're listening to this and thinking about something you've been building quietly, a habit, a skill, a version of yourself you haven't shown anyone yet, that instinct to keep it unspoken for now is in hiding. It's discipline finding its proper shape, the same shape Marcus gave his own. If that's where you are right now, it might be worth writing down, even briefly, what you're building in your own dark hours. Not to publish it. Just to know, the way Marcus knew, that it's real. There's a particular kind of integrity that only exists in the absence of an audience. And Marcus seemed to understand that this was the only kind worth having, because performed virtue collapses the moment the performance stops being profitable. Private virtue, virtue rehearsed in the dark until it's simply who you are, doesn't need an audience to survive. It's already survived the hardest test. Nobody was watching, and you did it anyway. Chapter 4, the transfer of power. Here's where the story earns its stakes, because private discipline that never touches public life is just a hobby. What makes Marcus's story worth telling 2,000 years later is that the private practice visibly, measurably transferred into how he governed under crisis. Consider what he was actually managing during these years. The Antonine Plague, likely smallpox or measles, historians still debate, swept through the Roman Empire during his reign, killing, by some estimates, several million people across the empire's territory, including, eventually, his own co-emperor, Lucius Verus. Entire units of the Roman military were depleted by disease rather than combat. Grain shortages followed. Economic strain followed that. And running underneath all of it, the unending war on the northern frontier that would occupy the final decade of his life and in fact would still be ongoing when he died, in camp on campaign, not in Rome, not in comfort. A lesser composed leader facing this combination of plague, war, and economic strain might have cracked publicly. Visible panic, erratic decisions, the kind of leadership failure that becomes its own historical case study. What contemporary accounts describe instead? however imperfect and however filtered through centuries of retelling, is a strikingly steady hand. Measured decisions. A continuation of legal and administrative reforms even during wartime. A reputation, which persisted long after his death, for fairness and restraint even when the empire around him was fraying. Chapter 5. Your unseen war. You are not commanding legions. You are probably not managing a plague. But you do have a war that nobody else can see, and it's worth naming plainly, because most of us go years without admitting it exists. It's the version of yourself you're quietly trying to build while everyone around you sees only the current, unfinished draft. It's the discipline you're practicing in rooms with no witnesses, the early mornings nobody applauds, the study sessions that produce no visible result for months, the difficult conversation you have with yourself in the mirror that no one will ever know took place. It's the habit you're rebuilding for the fourth time after failing the first three quietly, without announcing either the failure or the attempt, because you've learned that announcing it invites a kind of external pressure that somehow makes the private work feel less like yours. This is your unseen war. And Marcus's whole argument, whispered across 2,000 years, is that this is where character actually gets made. Not in the promotion, not in the achievement everyone congratulates you for. Those are just the visible tip of something that was assembled, piece by piece, somewhere nobody was looking. So here is the practice, distilled from a Roman emperor's midnight notebook into something you can actually use tonight. First, keep a private record. It doesn't need to be literary. Marcus's notebooks were rough, repetitive, unpolished. He wasn't performing for a reader. 10 minutes, a few honest sentences about where you fell short today and where you held the line, written for an audience of exactly one. Second, rehearse your response to difficulty before difficulty arrives. Marcus didn't wait for the plague to think about how he'd meet it. He'd already, in some sense, met it 100 times on paper. What's the hard conversation you're avoiding, the setback you're half expecting? Sit with it now privately, so you're not inventing your sea. Third, do one thing today that no one will ever know about. Not a secret indulgence, a secret discipline. A kindness you don't mention. A temptation you decline and never bring up. A small act of order in your own life that exists purely because you decided it should, with zero witnesses to reward you for it. And if you're doing that already, if there's a goal you've been building quietly, something you haven't posted about or told your friends, something still forming in the dark, that's not a phase to rush through so you can announce it later. That privacy is the work. Let it stay unwitnessed as long as it needs to. Marcus wrote to himself for years before anyone else ever read a word. The writing was never waiting for an audience to become valuable. It was already whole, alone, in the tent. Conclusion: what the light only reflects. We began with a myth, that greatness happens in front of us, on the stage, in the daylight. By now, hopefully, that myth looks a little thinner than it did 25 minutes ago. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire on earth. He commanded armies through a war that would not end. He governed through a plague that emptied cities. History remembers all of that. But Marcus himself, in his own private words, never once points to any of it as the source of his strength. He points, instead, to the tent. To the notebook. To the hours nobody recorded, where an aging, sick, exhausted man argued himself, sentence by sentence, back toward steadiness, for no reason except that he believed it mattered whether he did. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. That's the whole philosophy really, compressed into 8 words. Not be seen as one. Not be praised as one. Simply, be one. In the tent. At midnight. Where the only witness to your character is the person you'll wake up as tomorrow.